Hello world. Hello Portland. Hello PDX. Thanks for coming in for another episode. I've worked hard for this one, just so you all know. Been scouring the World Wide Web. It's a great place out there. Lots of information, lots of news, and I've got 3 news articles for today. Also have an awesome guest, but I'll let that be for a little bit in the future here. Let's talk about some news. America was in World War II, in case everyone missed that in, school. It looks like an old bomb from World War II exploded on a Japanese airport, causing a large crater in the taxiway. So I was digging around. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting, because I'm a history buff. I love history. And the article goes as follows. An unexploded American bomb from World War II that had been buried at a Japanese airport exploded Wednesday, causing a large crater in the taxiway, and the cancellation of more than 80 flights happened. And there were no injuries. And if you want to Google this, there is a really cool photo that's out on the internet. And the crater from the 500-pound bomb was 23 feet in diameter and 3 feet deep. 80 flights canceled. They were hoping today, the day that I'm recording this episode, which is a Thursday morning, they're hoping to have everything up and running again. The airport was built in 1943 as a former Imperial Japanese Navy flight training field from which some kamikaze pilots took off on suicide attack missions. A number of unexploded bombs dropped by the U.S. military during World War II have been unearthed in the area. Hundreds of tons of unexploded bombs from the war remain buried around Japan and are sometimes dug up at construction sites. And here's the crazy thing. Same week, a World War II bomb at a new soccer field in Germany also exploded, and nobody was hurt. Just be careful when you're kicking those balls around that you're not activating one of those bombs. That would not be fun. That happened. And then a second item I ran into on the World Wide Web, a couple reunited with a lost wedding film after 57 years. So this one, I take photos for a living. And so when I run across this kind of stuff, I'm like, oh, that's kind of intriguing. Aileen and Bill got married in Aberdeen, Scotland in 1967. So that was a moment ago. And the footage of the wedding, I guess they were walking out. It was a quick 3-minute video clip. It was on film. And they had borrowed equipment from a friend. And they watched the video one time. And then they returned the projector with the film in the projector unknowingly, and then lost track of it. So they had only seen it one time. And they saw it back in 1967. It says here, after watching the film again, which she had only done once before, she told the BBC Scotland News it was an absolutely amazing feeling. They immigrated to Australia in 1981, where they are now grandparents, both age of 77. Fast forward to April of this year, and back in Aberdeen, a gentleman named Terry was getting rid of old cinema footage he had filmed, transferred over to a DVD, and he ran across it, and then he posted it on Facebook. And about 6 months later, they ran into it, and they were like, hey, that's our wedding photo. So pretty cool. that kind of transitions into, if anyone has ever done this, I grew up close to the beach, and I've always thought about putting a message in a bottle. I was doing some research, and it looks like in New Jersey, they found a message in a bottle this year, and well, actually 2 months ago, and it's possibly the oldest message in a bottle. And the bottle, they've done some research, is from 1876, which is crazy to me that it would be from that long ago. And then there was also one that was found 60 years old with a letter inside, and it was a Coke bottle, a really old Coke bottle. The writer passed away 2 years ago. That message is being delivered to the daughter, which is really awesome. I watched the news article, and the writer was 14 when she put the message in the bottle on its journey, and it took 60 years, and someone found it. All of that happened here in the United States, so that's pretty neat. It's neat to find old things that maybe you've forgotten about or mean a lot to you, and it's neat to see those things in the news. One local item here, which is actually hits home for me. I have a 14-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son, and they have cell phones. If you're listening, you probably have or know someone who has a cell phone, if not yourself. And it's interesting how the Portland area high schools are kind of following the same road as a lot of other states and high schools and cities, where it looks like, according to the news that I've been reading, inside a Portland high school, they are essentially having the kids put their phones inside of a lockable bag, and they don't get it back until the end of the day. So this year, Grant High School Principal James did something all the experts say is overdue. He created a cell phone-free campus. He was expecting students to focus better in class. He was hoping to stop online bullying and drug deals on campus. He knew there might be an outcry from students and parents. And yes, all these things have happened to varying degrees. And I will tell you that my daughter tells me things, thank the Lord. She likes to communicate well, and we have that kind of relationship. And some of the stuff that goes on at middle schools even, it just kind of shocked me. So one of the results, though, of taking all the cell phones away is lunchtime got loud again. Kids are talking to each other, so that's a bonus. This person, last name McKee, works the lunch line every day, making sure students don't cut on the way to the pizza or burrito bar. I wish I had a burrito bar growing up. He started in Portland Public Schools as a counselor at Lincoln High School in 2014 and worked this fall. For the first time in years, he is seeing all their eyes again because they're not buried in their cell phones. They don't have their cell phones in their hands, so they're talking to each other. Go figure. And they're talking to him. Once they've gone through the line, specifically this time of year, which is the nice time of year in Portland, they're going outside and they're sitting in the grass and they're eating lunch and they're actually talking to each other. There's something that I believe we're missing in our society, which is having real conversation eye to eye without being distracted by a phone. As much as I like my phone, but I also take a couple weeks off a year and I purposely turn off my phone, and I think that's valuable. More than 70% of U.S. high school teachers say that student phone distraction is a major problem in their classrooms, according to a fall 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center. A growing body of research shows a correlation between the advent of smartphones and social media and a decline in teens' mental health. Rates of adolescent depression nearly doubled between 2010 and 2019, according to the Journal of Adolescent Health. There's this website. I Googled it. If you just Google the anxious generation, there's this movement and there's a book. It's called The Anxious Generation, which argues that high-tech childhoods are causing an epidemic of mental illness. I'll tell you, this is a book I'm going to get. I want to read it. I recommend a lot of parents read it. It says in the book, American teens average 9 hours of screen time a day, including 5 on social media. And I don't know if you all deal with the last minute. I did last night. My daughter says, I have something that I need to do for school, and it's a map, and I need help. And I said, how long have you known about this? And she says a week, but it's due tomorrow. Well, so I'm reading this, and it's like 9 hours of screen time a day, including 5 on social media. Man, that's a lot of productive time that could be utilized, if you ask me. The PPS school board is busy drafting a new policy to restrict cell phones in classrooms beyond the current off and away policy in most of the schools in the PPS district. New district-wide restrictions could go into effect as soon as the second semester of this year. Governor Tina Kotek has expressed support for a statewide policy limiting the use of smartphones in Oregon schools. Nearly a dozen states have already done it, including Florida, Indiana, Louisiana, and as of September 23rd, California joined. My takeaway from all of this is something that I'm going to read now. There needs to be some balance. And I love that kids are talking more, they're focusing more. There's some students that have said, hey, maybe the punishment is a little bit too much for having a cell phone. The punishment for having a phone out at Grant this year is a level 2/3 referral on par with starting a fight in the hallway. A copy of the referral goes to the student's behavioral file. The rumors are rampant among students and parents that colleges will see it on applications. Here's the deal. According to the PPS spokesperson, this is not true. This district does not send disciplinary records to colleges. Staff takes the phones away and stashes it in the office until the parent or guardian can pick it up. So the company that has these bags is called Yonder, and it's a California company with a Portland founder. So I thought that was interesting. Graham is a Jesuit high school graduate who got the idea for Yonder at the San Francisco Music Festival in 2012. I remember that hitting the news where to go into the festival you had to put your phone in a bag, and that was kind of an uproar. In addition to schools, the pouches are also popular at concerts and comedy shows. Yonder pouches cost about $25 to $30 per student. The company had a more than tenfold increase in sales from government contracts, primarily school districts, from 2021 to 2023. So, yeah, success for them, hopefully success for our kids. Closing this little article here, at Grant, math teacher Jamie Lyle already sees a huge change in her students and is relieved to have her whole class periods for instruction and building relationships with students rather than policing phones. It feels like another world, she says. It's really been amazing and wonderful. Lyle was chatting with a Spanish teacher whose students are more willingly participating in the dances and skits because they're not getting filmed by fellow students. That's a bonus too. Teachers have noticed an uptick in student engagement on the very first day of school. A group of 4 students at a table who didn't know each other had to figure out how to spell the word acknowledge. I haven't seen that kind of peer collaboration in years, Short says. Yeah, because I can use my phone and just say, hey Google or whatever, and it'll tell me how to spell whatever I want, right? But if I don't have it, I actually have to learn it. That's pretty awesome. A month into Grant's yonder era, meaning yonder those bags, despite the gripes from students and the colossal administrative lift, he stands firm. He says, I sleep well because it feels that it's the right thing to do. Somebody needed to stand up and say, this is an issue. We need to address it. I don't mind being that person. Kudos for him. I would say that there needs to be like this balance, and nothing's perfect, but you got to start somewhere. So I'm excited that the city of Portland and other states are starting to do this, because I have my kids put their cell phones in the middle of the table and face down, and we try and talk at dinner time. Doing that at school and keeping it away, I think that's a good thing. I have someone here today that is or was an educator, and I'm just excited to be able to talk about some of this stuff and talk about technology. He's been professionally creating interactive and promotional content for the web since 1998 for clients in various industries. He's been working with web, Android, iOS, AR, VR. He's an animator. He's a graphics video guy. He likes creating games and websites and multimedia, does some e-commerce. So he's just a man of many hats, and he loves technology like I do. He also taught in the digital art and design department at Kendall College of Art and Design from 2009 through 2023. This is Chris. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, Jared. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about some of this stuff myself.
Yeah, the world has gotten... We're in a microwave world where we can get information, which is great, anytime we want, because we've got an amazing computer in our hand everywhere we go, right? What do you think about the cell phone, put your phone in a bag before you're allowed into school?
I think it's fantastic on many levels. I love it. And this is coming from someone who spends, 10 to 12 hours a day in front of one, sometimes multiple screens. And as you talked a little about my background, I got into creating things and building things and animating things on the web when it became a commercial thing way back in the late 90s. And even before that, I grew up watching TV and playing video games and all this stuff. And it's been interesting to see this crescendo of technology go from something where, because I remember when the internet, was first dawning, at least commercially, that, there was hopes and dreams that this was going to save humanity, right, in all these different ways.
Yeah, and luckily the world didn't crash in the year 2000.
Correct. Yes. Right, which is a good reminder of sometimes the fear hype that can drive things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's really interesting when you're talking about this issue of cell phones in schools and whatnot, because I've been, deep in technology for a long time, and I also was, teaching at a technological, kind of section of an art school where I was surrounded by, dozens of monitors and Wi-Fi's and everything, you can imagine, tech, along with students that just more and more as the years go on, were just connected to the screen and in their pocket.
For sure. And just to let the listeners know, like, these weren't high school kids, right, that you were helping. These were like out of high school, or maybe older people that wanted to go back to school to gain some knowledge, right?
Yeah, correct. It was a mixture of high school graduates,
Cool.
as well as, older business professionals that would come back and try and retrain in certain elements.
And what I find interesting is the need to pick up the phone and be distracted. The phone doesn't care about your age.
Right, truly. It's actually a subject that I did a deep dive into 3 or 4 years ago, especially as kind of the onset of COVID and the lockdowns and whatnot. I've always been very health and wellness conscious, especially when it comes to the time I spend on the computer and sitting down. I was very active with sports and being outside growing up. Yeah. And at a certain point, I started working more than 40 hours, probably closer to 60 to 80 hours a week when I was 19 years old in front of computer screens. And by the time I hit 22 or 23, there was a significant difference. I didn't notice, but friends of mine noticed. Were like, dude, Chris, like you're huge, right? I gained 45 or
Screen
50
time.
Pounds. And one of the first things I looked into was just, my diet. And at the time, I was still eating like a child, living on every type of 99-cent chicken sandwich I could find from all these different fast food places around town.
And let's be honest, it's convenient,
and cheap.
But at the cost of what? Right?
Exactly. And for me, everyone's different, and I certainly don't think everyone should do what I did, but I made a pretty hardcore move of going strict vegetarian organic food, kind of in the early 2000s before it was cool enough to be in, main grocery stores. I lived in Tempe, Arizona at the time, and I moved next to this little vegetarian co-op. Yeah. I just went for it, and to be honest, first thing I did actually was stop drinking pop, and I just changed out the pop sugar with water. After, a few weeks, my natural thirst came back, and I was just always thirsty, and I would start to feel, different and better. And I'd say after a year of changing my diet, so much changed about me, not just the way I, just weight dropping off or whatever, but feeling sharper, more positive, less just run down, especially spending so much time in front of the screen. So I bring that up because, I have this kind of consciousness of health and wellness. And at a certain point, I started hearing, little things about, maybe it's crazy, maybe it's not, but maybe sitting here staring into a screen, having a phone in my pocket, being submerged in, an invisible thicket of Wi-Fi radiation. Yeah. Maybe that's not the best thing in the world to, be doing all the time without a little bit of, remediation and taking things,
Yeah. No, I didn't realize, I've always had this feeling that, there's something about, it's like anything, too much of anything can kill you, let's be honest.
Correct.
I can drink too much water and that'll kill me too, so, as awesome as it is to have a phone in my hand that has more operating power than the space shuttle when it went to the moon, which is crazy, I have to tell myself to put the phone down as an adult and re-engage in different ways. And I think there is a little bit of this minimalist pushback going on. You can buy cell phones now that have 3 apps on it, and it's monochrome screen. I almost did that 2 years ago, just invested in one of these very minimalistic. I can still text and make a phone call, but I'm not so drawn in and distracted. I think there's something of value in that. And then I'm looking at, part of this job that I do with the podcast, I'm educating myself. So anxiousgeneration.com/research/the-evidence. I know there's a little bit there, but you can find that link through the anxiousgeneration.com, and it's got all of the evidence there of like how anxiety and depression and all of this stuff is happening to the people that are going to pay my retirement. You know what I mean? These
Right.
like our future. We should probably look into this a little bit, and like anxiety, depression, bipolar, anorexia, substance abuse, like all of this stuff, ADHD. None of that is being helped by giving a young person a cell phone with social media and all of those pressures. It's just like crazy. Anxiety between 18 and 25 has like gone up. Like I'm looking at the graph on the computer here. It's just skyrocketed. So, you know, as difficult as it is to read an article where kids are saying, hey, maybe the punishment is a little bit too much.
At what cost?
At what cost?
Right.
You know, and so, like I said earlier, before I brought you on, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good start, and maybe we can meet in the middle somewhere, and we find that there's a balance. I just want there to be balance, man.
Yeah, understood. It's interesting. I did kind of, just living in the tech world, feeling this happen to myself, and then also being an educator at the college level and seeing over 15 years, every 3 or 4 years, the students coming in more and more inundated and, more and more addicted.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you bring up some of these things like, literally addiction. I mean, there's been architects of the big social media firms that talk about how they specifically, engineer things to fire the right, dopamine receptors to just keep you looking at the screen as long as possible because it's their job to do that, right?
Well, it's the constant scrolling. Like,
infinite
I'm on
scroll.
Instagram. I mean, everybody can find me. Shameless plug, 47 Knuckles, 47 _ Knuckles on Instagram. But the point that I'm bringing up is I can get on there and I literally, it never ends. I just scroll and scroll and scroll. And then I look at my watch and I'm like, where did that half an hour go?
And if you do it
It's
long
crazy.
enough, you can feel your mouth actually open. And kind of like your brain waves go from a certain attention span to one where you're just taking in whatever's said to you. One thing that when I talked about doing a deep dive on this, we don't need to get too much into this, but I think it's fascinating that there's a lot of effects on, humans in general, children a little quicker, that are very obvious to see, like the addiction, the social issues, everything that you had mentioned. But there's a whole other level of like whether or not the non-ionizing radiation, which I can explain a little bit about this, is healthy or not in the amount that we're actually being exposed to. It's been known for decades and decades that ionizing radiation, which is radiation that can heat up your skin, basically. We've known that X-rays are bad and things like that in extreme.
They put a big magnet vest on me when I go and get my teeth X-rayed.
Exactly.
Like, hello.
And it's very interesting because there's a large body of consensus that has said for decades that non-ionizing radiation, meaning the exact stuff that makes all of our tech work, right? The radio frequencies, our cell phones, our Wi-Fi, that's just not harmful. And there's been kind of decades of research that have started to come out, actually started in the Navy in the 1940s with some of their radar equipment. They started finding people getting sick and having issues with this stuff that wasn't necessarily heating things up. And to this day, all of the cell phone safety regulations from the FCC are all based on what they call the SAR value, the specific absorption rate. And it comes down to basically, if you hold your cell phone up against your head, how, quickly it'll heat up your brain. But there's actually thousands of studies, and I've actually read about a half a dozen books on this. I did a deep dive during COVID, right? Everyone turned into either...
the rabbit hole is deep.
Yeah, exactly. But it's fascinating that, I've read books by PhDs, industry insiders, that basically, there's something to the fact that there's different types of like DNA damage that can happen. It can help, screw up your cellular activity, let toxins pass through your blood-brain barrier that you're not supposed to.
Wow.
And when you go deep into this, you also find, there's this whole other very, aggressive group that says, that's all bullshit, basically.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to find, I've read books where it talks about the telecommunications companies kind of following the lead of the cigarette industry, or like what happened with asbestos and like building materials.
Yep.
And it's just very interesting to see like industry-funded studies versus independent studies. And ultimately what it comes down to is, this is my livelihood. I'm not going to go live in a cave or just start, being a park ranger in my bare feet, which maybe sounds great. But, this is what I've done. I write JavaScript for hours on end during the day. And I personally have taken certain precautions, like at home, I turn off my Wi-Fi at night. I hardwire certain things that I wouldn't. And they're just little steps that can go a long way. And when it comes to bringing it back to this kind of laws being established in schools, for all of those reasons and more, I love it.
Yeah.
Like this idea of taking the precautionary principle to something that we've never really been exposed to before.
Yeah.
But even outside of all of that, the non-ionizing stuff, just what's obvious to see, it makes a lot of sense to break that addiction. Now, there's going to be a lot of problems with that because it's still an addiction, and people are used to being constantly connected, parents to children and vice versa, and the very real concern of emergencies, and how do you balance that with not giving full access to just pure entertainment all the time.
And in my daughter's school, they let them have their phones at lunchtime and in between classes, but not in the class. I'm actually would be okay if it was just lunch. Like you've got, at least I did when I was in high school, you had 4 minutes to get to the next class. So now everyone's running to the next class with their head buried in their phone because they didn't have it during class. Like just make it lunchtime and then be done. So again, following that, finding the middle ground in all of this, I think is going to be really important. It's interesting. You've got the extreme of one school saying no, nothing at all, and then my daughter where it's like this in-between thing, and I personally am okay with them going towards, because she's in the Beaverton School District, and so if the Beaverton School District follows suit with the Portland PPS, I'm okay with that. And my daughter may not like it, but
yeah, a couple of years ago, the entire country of France actually outlawed Wi-Fi in certain schools. I want to say daycare and preschools and things like that.
Wow.
So it's fascinating, and it's very encouraging to hear that it's just an issue that's becoming, developing into the public awareness, because I think as soon as a couple of years ago, it just wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You have anything else you want to... I mean, you did a deep dive in this. Is there any extra nugget you want to throw in here before I transition into, by the way, there's some history that happened October 3rd, which we're filming this and talking on October 3rd, so I want to touch on some of those things. But man, I appreciate you and your knowledge base when it comes to all this. I had no idea about France. That's crazy.
To be honest, I could go on about this for hours, and perhaps if anyone listening is interested, wanted to reach out.
Maybe we could do part 2.
Yeah, but I'm happy to move on to
all right.
other subjects.
Sounds good. October 3rd. So what happened on this day? Everybody listening, if you don't know, O.J. Simpson's hand did not fit in that glove.
I remember watching the white Bronco speeding down the highway in real time on the news.
I was at a restaurant, and I don't remember who I was with. They kept on showing this white Bronco up on the on the TV, and I'm like, what's going on? And then O.J. Simpson. So 1995, O.J. Simpson was acquitted in the killings of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Lyle Goldman. The former football player had been accused of murdering his ex-wife and her friend on June 13th, 1994. The high-profile case and the subsequent trial of Simpson captured widespread media and public news. Yeah, in the United States, and it wasn't just the United States, because he was like this really amazing football player too. So it was a worldwide thing. And then my wife, like 10 years later, she's like, "Yeah, I really wanted a white Bronco." like it's funny, whenever I see a white Bronco or the Bronco of that design, I always think of O.J. Simpson. It's kind of crazy. Did you ever have any friends that had a white Bronco?
No, but I feel like you're not the only one that instantly has OJ come to mind, because it was just plastered.
It was a big thing.
All over.
Yeah. Also, 1952, UK tests its first atomic bomb on October 3rd. It was called Operation Hurricane. The test was conducted near the Montebello Islands in Western Australia. The operation made the UK the third country to have a nuclear weapon. The United States and the Soviet Union were the first two. 1932, Iraq gains independence from the United Kingdom. And shame on me, I didn't know that they were not independent and that United Kingdom was a part of that. United Kingdom had a lot of hands in a lot of stuff all over the world. The West Asia country came under British control in 1920 after the end of the First World War. After taking control of the country, the British installed the deposited Syrian king as the first king of Iraq. So that was rather interesting. Didn't know that. 1863, the National Thanksgiving Day was proclaimed. What's your most favorite holiday? Is it Christmas or Thanksgiving?
Halloween.
Oh, I didn't even throw that in there. You're one of those. Oh, are you a Jack Skellington fan?
Yes, as I grew up loving animation. That's what led me into computers in the first place.
Such a good
any
movie.
kind of claymation like that is just so impressive, the way they do the frame-by-frame motion.
Yeah, stop. I always called it stop-go animation, but yeah, that was really cool. America President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday of November as Thanksgiving Day. The holiday has been celebrated annually since that year. 1863. That's crazy. 1849. Edgar Allan Poe. Do you know about this guy, Allan Poe?
I do. Nevermore.
He was seen in public for the last time in 1849. The Baltimore, Maryland-based company, poet and author, best known for his poem The Raven, was found sick and delirious on the streets and taken to Washington College Hospital, where he died a few days later. He was 40 years old at the time of his death. What was the average lifespan back then? I wonder if it was 50 years old or 40. I mean, I think he was probably about average, I would say. I don't, just guess.
Yeah, it sure does kind of, it's impressive how much someone would accomplish by what we might consider an early age.
Yeah.
In, decades past, someone that we've been learning about since
He accomplished a lot
school.
because he wasn't buried in his cell phone.
Bingo.
There you go. He used his time wisely rather than waiting for the night before to work on your assignment and turn it in.
Indeed.
Sorry.
After 4
My
hours
lovely
of
daughter
TV
is going
shows.
to kill me. Oh, I forgot I put this on my notes. In 2003, do you remember who Siegfried and Roy were?
Oh, of course. The lion tiger tamers in Vegas.
Magic guys. October 3rd was the day that one of them was attacked by the tiger, and then I think their career kind of went downhill from there. But pretty impressive, the fact that they were actually doing that. But yeah, evidently that happened October 3rd as well. All right. Are you ready? I have this little thing. It's called Fact or Fiction.
I was born ready, Jared.
Oh my goodness. So I'm queuing up the special sound effects because if you answer it wrong,
Ooh, I don't want to get that.
no, we don't want that. If you get it right though, you get one of two options. You get this one.
Correct.
Yes, so that would be correct. And then we get the more like laid back female essence here.
Correct.
There you go. So we'll see which one we get. I've got, let's see, 5 on my list. And these are either fact or fiction. And they're either headlines or news articles. And you need to tell me whether or not it's fact or fiction. So let's just start with the first one here. Forest Park. Are you familiar with Forest Park in Portland?
I am.
So Forest Park is this amazing park where when I was 23, 24, I used to go up with my mountain bike and I would ride about 24 miles on the weekend.
Oh, wow.
So there's trails and hiking areas and all kinds of stuff. But here's the fact or fiction. Forest Park on the city's west side is one of the country's largest urban parks with over 5,100 acres. Is that fact or fiction, sir?
Okay, interesting. So I've been in Portland just over a year. I'm definitely familiar with Forest Park. I've driven through it, taken a little hike through it.
Yeah.
Until it's big, the only part I'm questioning is the 5,100 acres. I don't, in my mind, that's not really quantifying as realizing how much that is. If this is incorrect, I feel like it's based on that number. But I'm going to go ahead and say fact.
Okay, so I have read somewhere, and I believe it's true, that it is the largest city park. The only other one is I believe it's the New York, what's the big?
Central Park.
Central Park is the number 2 city largest park. So, let's see, what do the buttons tell us on this one?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Ching.
we're good. You got that one. That one is good. Question number 2. From 1977 through 1995. Are you a sports fan?
I am particularly, yes.
The Blazers.
I particularly like the NBA basketball.
There we go. So you and I have another thing to talk about after we're done with this podcast. The Trailblazers held the longest streak in NBA history for sold-out games, with 814 consecutive home games being sold out. The Boston Red Sox has since surpassed that streak. Do you think that's fact or fiction?
Okay. As a hardcore NBA fan, ever since the days of the GOAT, Michael Jordan,
Yes.
This is interesting because it does not seem correct in the sense that the Lakers, the Celtics, the Trailblazers are not known as one of the premier teams.
Yeah.
However, if I think about the actual, city and demographic, there's also most of the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the time that the Trailblazers have been here, they've been the only professional sports team in Portland. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the fact that Portland has no other, for a
Right.
very long time, no other professional team.
That makes me want to say it's true, but just overall my gut NBA fan feeling says that one is not fact.
Oh, boy. And the buttons.
Don't!
Oh, it is very true.
Wow, nice job, Trailblazers.
Because, so, back when, was it Bill Walton, if you know who he is,
Yep.
the Blazers have won the championship once, which is a bummer. But I've been in this stadium or in the arena where they won that championship, and it's not very big.
Ah, okay.
So I think one of the reasons why it was sold out for so long, like there weren't very many seats, man. Like everyone wanted them to win, and for so long, like, people were so passionate over one team in the city. And then if you got a ticket, man, you weren't giving it to anybody else. So I think that's part of it. But it's interesting that the Boston Red Sox have surpassed that, which, I don't know, it would be kind of cool to see the Boston Red Sox in their home. But I'm not a huge baseball fan. But
neither am I.
yeah.
Plus, there's so many more baseball games in a season.
Yeah. So that's pretty impressive that the Boston Red Sox have surpassed that streak. All right, so we're sitting at 50% right now.
Ooh, that's not a passing grade. Step that up.
Number 3, Portland was founded in 1845 by 2 real estate men from New England.
Okay, so I have no clue whether this is true or false. I do not know my Portland history very well. So just as a shot in the dark, based on the fact that the first 2 were true, and this one has what I would consider, and this could be way off, but I would consider this to have the telltales of a possible false statement, in the sense that there could be any one of 3 items: the date, 1845, the profession, real estate, where they're from, New England. Any one of those could be off. I'm still kicking myself from missing the last one, but I'm going to go ahead and say this is also not true.
So 1845. I mean, I should have done a little more research, but 1845, I wonder what else happened that year and how many people were actually in what we call now Portland. Evidently, it was worth its while because 2 real estate men decided that Portland was founded then.
Correct!
Crazy. I don't know. I had no idea. New England. So yeah, 18. If I were in your seat, I probably would have voted that was false or fiction as well.
Right.
So I can't blame you. Number 4, the city's first airport was at Swan Island. They called it the Swan Island Airport. Opened in 1926, but services ceased in 1940. And in a previous podcast, we talked about Swan Island, and I don't know what it is about the little islands, but lots of cool things happen around the islands in Portland. So I'm just, not that I'm telling you it's fact or fiction, but what do you think?
Boy, again, a factoid that I'm not familiar with.
I know, I'm throwing in the Portland stuff.
And I'm definitely probably going to dig myself a deeper hole. And now I'm thinking, okay, the first 3 were all true, right? So how, I'm trying to look for patterns here. It certainly feels true, but I feel like one of these has got to be false.
What's your gut telling you?
That's a good question.
Like, is it true as an educator?
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that pops into your head, if you don't really know the answer, is it typically the correct answer?
Absolutely, usually. So you're right. My gut wants to say true. The only reason my gut is nagging at false is based on the pure fact that the first 3 were true.
Okay.
So reading the statement in, isolation, again, it could be false. I know, I'm so close. Because, again, location, date, another date. Like, if any one of those are wrong, I'm going to hate myself if this is incorrect, but we'll say correct.
Correct!
Yeah, there we go. I had to throw the heartbeat in there because there was a dramatic moment.
At least it wasn't the Jeopardy noise.
Yeah, I haven't loaded that one yet. Maybe I'll do that some other time. Good idea.
That puts the real pressure on.
Yeah, the pressure. All right. So number 5. So we've got. Are we still sitting at 50%? I think we are.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a big one.
Yep. So this is the make it or break it. Ever heard of the game The Oregon Trail?
Absolutely. Elementary school.
Love that game.
On the Apple IIe computers.
Yes, sir. The original The Oregon Trail computer game debuted December 3rd, 1971. Again, this could be fact or fiction. I'm not telling you either one, but spawning a beloved series played by generations of children. The game was popular among American and elementary school students from the mid-1980s to the mid-2000s, as many computers came bundled with the game, which you and I kind of talked about the Oregon Trail earlier, and I remember all the computers in the computer lab had the Oregon Trail on it. MECC followed up on the success of the Oregon Trail with similar titles such as the Yukon Trail and the Amazon Trail. So let's see, set on the Oregon Trail in 1848 was the premise of the game. I'm sure lots of people know about the game Oregon Trail. As a type in game in 1986, the phrase, "Have you died of dysteria?" Dysentery.
Yeah.
Boy, I butchered that one. "Have you died of dysentery?" has been popularized on T-shirts. I saw one of those T-shirts a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, that's priceless. And other promotional merchandise. In 2021, the game's inventor died from complications of dysentery.
I hope not.
Is this fact or fiction?
Oh, man. I almost want to say it rings an empty bell, but I do not. I feel like I would have heard of that, and it would have been obvious to me if in case that was the fact. I've certainly, growing up in Michigan, we knew about the Oregon Trail, not just in Oregon here, and I even referenced it several times on the drive across the country out here. But having the game's inventors, now I'm pretty sure it's a fact that the inventor of the Segway ended up falling to his doom off a cliff on a Segway or something like that. I may need to be fact-checked on that. But this one, I'm going to go, especially because the first four are true, I'm going to go false on this fifth one and hope this puts me over the 50%.
So, I don't know. It could have been a viral moment if the game's inventor died from complications of dysentery.
Correct.
No. It's false. So you got it right.
Oh,
so,
right.
So if you got 3 right and 2 wrong, you're the educator here. What are we sitting at percentage-wise?
Oh, man, maybe like a low C. I believe I'd be at a passing grade.
It's a passing grade.
Certainly not towards the top of the class, but I'll take that with some Oregon history.
So out of 3 guests, you sit number 2.
Oh.
So you're not at the bottom, which, you're right in the middle. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
So all of that was true, except for one thing on that final fact or fiction. The inventor did not die of dysentery, but all of that other stuff was crazy. And in preparation for today, I hopped on my computer to see if there was a new version of the Oregon Trail.
Ooh.
And it looks amazing.
Oh, cool.
I'll have to show you after.
I would be way into that.
They want to charge you $25 for the game, the digital download, and it's really tempting. Maybe I can tell my wife I'm doing it for educational purposes.
Same.
There you go. Oh man. Well, Chris, you've got to I have to admit, I went on LinkedIn and I stole some of these headlines about you. I'm a little jealous because I did do a little bit of coding and mobile application development when I went back to school as an older individual. So you and I connect on many levels when it comes to technology and how things work and all of that.
Sure.
you've been doing content on the web since 1998. Was that with a Windows Millennium Edition?
Oh, that was Windows 95.
Windows 90.
Yep.
You know why I'm mentioning Windows Millennium? Because it was absolutely horrible. Everybody hated it. But Windows 95?
Yeah.
Wow. So tell me about 1998. How did, like,
Sure.
what started the passion for you?
Right. So I'll back up a little bit and I'll
Yeah.
probably end in 1998.
Okay.
That, in terms of just being into interactive technology, I'll put it, a very big influence, I'd say early in life as a kid, was the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh, yeah.
Mario Brothers
Huge.
and Zelda and all of that hit me and my friends, probably you as well, just at the right time.
Yeah. Did you have the robot? It came with
I
a robot.
had a friend that had Rob the
Yeah,
robot,
so
and
awesome.
I think it took me about 5 years to actually get a Nintendo in my home from when I was playing at my friends' homes, but
Yeah.
playing with the Duck Hunt
Yeah.
gun, and they
Yeah.
were very well ahead of their time.
Yeah.
But getting to the point of blowing into the cartridges and wiggling it so
I
it
know.
would work properly.
Yeah.
But I definitely played a lot of video games, went from Nintendo to the Sega Genesis to Super Nintendo to the PlayStation and
Yeah.
the PlayStation 2. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because I rode that wave all the way until about the middle of college. I grew up in Michigan, and in high school, before I got to college, I actually spent 2 years in what was traditionally called a VOED center, where you would learn a trade. You would learn welding or how to be a mechanic, and it was kind of a new offering that they had, which was CAD, computer-aided design, or computer-aided drafting.
Yeah.
And my first 6 months was all on a drafting board with a pencil and paper.
Wow.
And I went to that because it was kind of the dawn of the 3D graphics industry. So right before I had the opportunity to do this, movies like Terminator 2
Yeah.
and Jurassic Park
Yeah.
were coming out, that there was just this whole wow factor of like, how did they
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
And I learned just enough to learn that, like, okay, this AutoCAD stuff has
Yep.
some 3D graphics. That's, I was also very, very big, besides just a gamer. Even before I was old enough to be a gamer, I loved animation. I mean, all kids love cartoons,
Yeah.
but I studied them and drew and always wanted to be an animator.
Yeah.
So that kind of confluence of loving the history of animation and loving the interactivity of the games, and then seeing the computer generated, the CGI stuff come into play, it was really a perfect storm to know exactly this is
Yeah.
what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a crazy time. I right around that same time, I went to ITT Tech, which is
Yeah, I remember.
gone now.
I remember ITT Tech.
One semester of AutoCAD.
Yeah.
And we had these crazy hard drives that would look like a tape, and you'd actually plug them in to the computer, and you could remove your own hard drive and take it with you. But yeah, it was, I think a lot of people also were in the same boat as you, man. Like, there was so much. I had a friend early on, like the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis. He had both of them
Oh man, it's good living.
side by side, and I was always bugging my dad. Can we go over to? I don't remember the guy's name, because he had both systems, and it was like the ideal setup. So it was really cool. But no, that puts you on a direct trajectory. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I spent 2 years learning AutoCAD, dipping my toes in some 3D graphics, and that's how, I think it was actually through my instructor that I became aware of just a really small computer school that at the time was called the CAD Institute, for the Computer Aided Design Institute, that eventually grew in accreditation and turned into the University of Advancing Technology.
Got it.
And it was a small little trade school in Tempe, Arizona. So I was a 17-year-old kid, and I graduated high school and went across the country to go, become a man and live a new life and learn all of this cool stuff. That was in 96, and it was like a 3-year program or so. And during the school, learned a lot of really cool like animation history stuff, studied the history of Disney and their early studios and just what they were able to accomplish and how, which is really fascinating. It's really one of my favorite books to this day. Is called The Illusion of Life, and it's a really big, nice kind of coffee table hardcover book that goes through. It's really good for anyone that's into film, even photography, anything visual or storytelling.
Yeah.
They just learned so many rules and established so many rules that we still follow today. That's really, really cool. So I was learning all of that and was learning 3D animation, was learning desktop publishing. Everything was so new. There was no workforce out there doing this stuff yet.
Yeah.
It was like, everything's going to be digital. I remember one of my instructors blew my mind when he told me that, none of the jobs you're going to get even exist yet. And we're like, whoa, and sure enough, he was right.
Yeah.
And at some point, I think I had a few months left in school, but during the time to help put myself through college, I was a pizza delivery guy. A place called Gus's New York Pizza.
Gus's New York Pizza.
Fantastic. I was introduced to ranch and pizza then, all kinds of wild things.
Yeah, right.
And once upon a time, I delivered a pizza to what I thought was just a house, but it was a small office of this startup that was doing web stuff. And I walked in and I saw the computers and I saw a couple kids that were around my age. I think I was 19 at this point.
Yeah.
And I just kind of was like, whoa, what do you guys do here? And I'll never forget, the owner at the time looked up at me with wide eyes, who eventually was someone I worked with I still work with him. It's been 25 years.
Wow.
And he just popped up and said, why? Do you know HTML? Like with this desperate look, like we need help with this stuff.
Help.
And at the time, I thought I was, so cool. Like, here, give me your business card. And I brought back, like a week later, I did a 3D animation of their business card logo.
Yeah.
And they're just like, you're in. Let's do this.
Sold.
Yeah. So it was a really cool, transition that I didn't really look for. It just kind of happened. But I did recognize the opportunity when it came to really kind of go all in.
That is so awesome. Like, wow, what a cool story. Yeah. I just imagine you pulling up in the pizza delivery truck from all of the Pixar movies.
Yeah. It's funny. My name is Chris, and my last name, Brown, is just as generic.
Yeah,
right?
Smith, whatever.
Yeah. I'm a much better dancer than that other Chris Brown you might have
heard.
Yeah.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah. But regardless, when I pulled into this place, there was already at least one Chris, maybe a couple of them. Wow. And I had some pretty crazy, out of control hair back then. So they just started calling me Kramer. Seinfeld was, big in that time. And for the first 6 years of my professional life, I was just Kramer. We would go to, board meeting, Fortune 500 company. Kramer, what do you got for us?
They should have called you Newman.
Right?
Oh, that guy. Well, oh, wow. That's pretty cool. So is that 1998 then?
Yes. So
okay.
I'll give you a quick synopsis of how 25 years flew by. Is in 1998, delivered that first pizza, built my first website, started working on applications. They were called back then. Now we call them apps.
Yes.
But back then, we weren't even putting them like on the web. They were on CD-ROMs. And one of the coolest things to do was to make like a business card cut, like size CD, and put your presentation on it.
Yeah.
And we learned early on that like you need to cut out a circle or it won't work on all the CD-ROM drives.
Yes.
Interesting stuff. But over the years, as things, just generally evolved on the web from a professional standpoint, I learned some interesting early lessons. So I worked in a startup from, I got there and I think I was the 5th employee, including the 2 owners. And then, they grew up to maybe 12 people or so while I was there over 5.5 years. And at a certain point, they sold the company. And I didn't have any stake in it or anything. And it was kind of like, oh, thanks for all the hard work.
Yeah. What are you going to do now?
So I moved back home to Michigan, and luckily I found a job pretty quickly because at that time there still was not a lot of resources or with people with the kind of experience that I had, even though I was pretty young.
Yeah.
So I went from working in a startup to a company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. At the time, it was called Structure Interactive, and they had like 55 employees. So it was like 10 times the size. And at the time, it was, the biggest firm, web firm, interactive firm,
Wow.
kind of in the central Michigan area. And that was a very different situation where I went from having to wear multiple hats, programming, design, project management, client interfacing, everything. Like I grew up quickly in the startup, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, everything that I learned and was molded into through that. But then I kind of saw the other side of business where I joined this big company, and it was about the same time frame. It was 5 or 6 years. I became much more of a programmer there, and I built software for big companies like Amway and Steelcase and different things that are in the Midwest. And I would spend like an entire year programming one piece of software. So I became much more of a hardcore programmer nerd rather than I wanted to be an animation 3D guy.
Yeah.
So I kind of followed the flow of just what the industry wanted me to do in a certain sense. And again, I made the choice to move back to the Midwest rather than go to like, Silicon Valley or Hollywood and try and go work for George Lucas or something cool like that.
Yeah. How cool would that be?
Yeah, seriously. But the difference with the big company was after 5 or 6 years, they went the other way. Instead of selling in the economy crash of 2008, they went out of business.
Okay.
And it came all the way down to, a week and a half from when I was supposed to get a paycheck. They called in and were like, sorry, we're done. Like, you're not going to get a paycheck anymore. And at the time, I wasn't too devastated. I just honestly thought, I guess I'm going to have to move to a larger location, get a job, and it is what it is. But interestingly enough, I did good enough work that I was kind of known by the clients I'd worked with, and they started coming to me, and I really became a freelancer just naturally, which for 4 or 5 years was amazing because I was doing the exact same work, the exact same people. I was able to charge like 3 times the hourly, and I was working from home before COVID made it cool. It was quite the setup. And right around that same time also is when I transitioned into freelance. I want to say about 6 months before, maybe it was less than that, before the agency I was working in went under, I started working at the Kendall College of Art and Design. Okay. And that was interesting because when I had first moved to Michigan, they were part of just who I was sending out resumes, hey, you want me to work? Yeah. And I actually got an email response 5 years later. 5 whole years went by, and the school responded and said, hey, do you still do this cool Flash stuff? We'd love to have you teach it.
I don't understand how that's a thing because... Like, were you in somebody's junk mail inbox and they're like, oh, this isn't junk mail? That's crazy.
Yeah. What it was the head of the department at the time, Bill Fisher, who I ended up working with for 15 years. We did great projects together. He saw my resume, liked it, didn't need me yet, stuck me in a folder. Okay. And then 5 years later, when he needed me, pulled it back up.
There you go. Okay. Wow.
So you never know when things might come back around.
That's wild. And so you did some teaching there.
Yes. So I spent 15 years there teaching. Initially, it was all, if you're old enough to remember the term Flash on the internet, which was all very much graphical way to do cool things. I initially started teaching that, but I moved into teaching 3D graphics and web design, and the term Flash slowly got replaced by interactive.
Okay. And wasn't there something in between? There was Flash, and then there was it like HTML10 or something?
HTML5 would be the term that really ended up, along with Apple deciding that they didn't want to continue to mess with the proprietary Flash player. It was kind of a perfect storm of the technology. The standards technology, HTML5 is kind of a group term which really means HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are the 3 programming languages that anything you look at on the internet is made out of. Yeah. The standards bodies that decide what goes in them, they released a massive upgrade that could suddenly do a lot of the things that you couldn't do before without this separate plugin.
Got it.
So then the mobile phones decided, you know what, we're done with this plugin. You have to do it this way now. And it was kind of a push, which brings up an interesting, having such a long career and doing so many different types of projects, from design, animation, development, everything in between. It is very interesting that every 2 or 3 years, I have to relearn the way I'm supposed to build something.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're always teaching yourself something new. And like, I remember when I did mobile application development at MMI, Minneapolis Media Institute, like halfway through my education, there was a whole new iOS to learn. And I'm like, but I just learned the other one, man. Like it was this crazy, and I'm thinking, what did I just sign up for?
It can be absolutely maddening in that sense of like, I just learned this and now you're telling me I have to learn again. And at a certain point, you just have to embrace a lifelong learning experience.
Yeah.
And even to this day, I've learned at least to incorporate that with my work and the structure of contracts and things like that. So there's always like a discovery period where, especially now that all of a sudden, AI is just moving at such a breathtaking pace. Before it was kind of like every 3 or 4 years, like any given aspect of web design or development, whether you're creating the graphics or you're doing the programming, it's like every 3 or 4 years, there's this consensus of this new way you're supposed to do things, right? And sometimes it's worthwhile to follow those trends, and sometimes it's worth kind of seeing them for what they are. But I will say that overall, it's very worthwhile, again, to embrace a life of learning if you work in media in any way, because things are just going to change, and certain things don't change in terms of what goes behind the tools. It's the tools that change. And as you learn that, then you'll start to kind of enjoy learning new tools and just using, your knowledge base.
Do you think it's easier to accept that mind shift because you were also an educator? Does that make it easier for you to kind of like in your mind be like, hey, this is just part of the gig and I've got certain tools to navigate that, because you were on the other side, right? Helping individuals learn things.
Yeah, that's a very good question, one I haven't really thought of, but I would say no. Because first off, I worked professionally for 10, 12 years before I started teaching, and it was already happening.
Okay.
And then when it comes to teaching at, any kind of institution, things move much slower there than they do in like the production environment of corporate America. And I would say that I was pushed much, much more, outside of teaching than inside of teaching. But it helped the teaching aspect because I was able to bring, this experience of that to the students. And when I was teaching them, even 10, 15 years ago, you can learn software on YouTube by yourself. Right? And there's a lot that I would teach the students that had nothing to do with what was on the syllabus or what was the software, but how to be a professional person and how to survive in the business world and how to find what you enjoy and to focus on it and to not spend too much time learning. And at some point you have to do.
At some point you have to do. I remember I had a guy when I was at MMI, and he was on the ground floor of the Oculus team.
Oh, cool.
And so he was telling me about this new thing, and I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, you plug it into a computer, and you put it on your head, and I'm helping them with like debugging it and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, like, can we be friends? Because it was like this idea of, AR virtual reality thing that was just, it was on the cusp of kind of going crazy. And then, of course, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and he's kind of running with that now too. But
Yeah.
crazy. Did you, like, growing up, did you have anybody in your family, like a mom who was a teacher or anybody? Like,
No.
Or was it just kind of a natural, like you had no experience from family at all when it came to being an instructor? That's interesting.
More of the latter. I'd say, like, historically, if I go back, a couple generations, but as far as I can go back, most of my family were farmers. My
Wow.
immediate parents, my father was a Vietnam vet and just held various odd jobs as I
Yeah.
was growing up, car dealership, home repair, things like that.
Yeah.
And my mom was always an elderly caretaker.
Wow.
And I would say that the teaching thing, 100%, I always liked the idea of teaching. Even as a kid, before I got into any of the computer stuff, I kind of thought, like, this is cool, I can do this.
Yeah.
And it was natural in the sense of I was spending so much time learning things that were brand new that there wasn't many people out there. There wasn't anyone much older than me, or I shouldn't say older than me, but had been doing it longer than me.
Yeah.
And it was just a really good fit to be able to say, hey, it's a big industry to get, students into. And I originally, because it's funny, I thought at some point they were going to, like, make me learn how to teach before I did it, so to speak. I really got thrown into the fire.
Oh, man. The
And
School of Rock, maybe?
Yeah.
You could have been that guy.
Yeah, exactly. But I went to, like, a couple of events that kind of talked about the way people learn and different, brain activities. But ultimately, I was just told, you know what, like, teach what you know. And it took a couple semesters to get into that groove. But then when I started to, when it got easier to connect with students on a personal level, learn what they were looking for, learn what they wanted, as soon as they realized what I knew, they were really excited to get into things.
I remember my most favorite teacher in grade school was my social studies teacher, and the guy was so passionate about current events and history and what was happening in the world around us. Like, his passion was addictive. Like, it rubbed off on everybody. And I still remember he was the biggest Wolverine fan. Michigan.
Oh, I was going to say, like X-Men or University of Michigan?
University of Michigan. And, like, you'd walk into his classroom and he had a University of Michigan Wolverine, the yellow W trash can. He had the banner. I mean, he was there. It was, like, everywhere. And he also had multiple filing cabinets, and you open them up, and the Oregonian, which is a newspaper, has been publishing forever. He has, like, every issue, like World War II. He's got all kinds of stuff from the Blazers. Like, so his passion for what he did was, I think it's one of the reasons why I love history and I love watching old documentaries on how the world was, is because of that man.
That's so cool.
So I can only imagine, like, you learning about the kids in the class or the people that were there when they saw how passionate you were about what you were sharing, that was part of the special, like, blend of things that you brought to the table, that I would say, as much as you were learning about them, they were learning how passionate you were, which then they were like, hey, like, this is awesome. Like, I want to be passionate like that.
Yeah, that's a really cool insight. I certainly had a couple of teachers. I had an economics teacher that was like that everyone just gravitated towards. And, years later, I will have ex-students, contact me and just say, you were my favorite teachers and that you really inspired me to do this and that. And it's kind of, honestly, it's a little embarrassing, but it
humbling,
totally, makes you think, like, wow, how much, as an individual, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're a teacher or you're going and, working in a factory line, how much you actually affect people around you.
Oh, yeah.
With your attitude and with just your general zest for life and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it is cool to hear that come back and those stories of inspiration that at the time you just are oblivious to.
Yeah. So that's a interesting, odd transition I'm going to make right now, because now you're in Portland.
Yes.
And I think it's amazing how you and I met, how you're hanging out here 3 to 4 times a week in a collaborative office for website design, UI, UX, and you're taking on a role just like I am, but in a different field, to where the goal is to lead others and mentor people and be a creative lead in your field to help Portland. And so did you ever think you'd be on the 11th floor in downtown Portland interacting with, isn't it crazy how I really believe everything's for a reason, because you've got this history of leading others. You've got the joy of technology, and how, like I told you, I've got a teacher that part of who I am is because of that man. I love the idea of being able to help others on a level that maybe not everybody gets to. So yeah, what do you think? Here on the 11th floor, man.
Yeah, right. There's a couple things to unpack there, right?
Yeah.
First, I'll kind of explain how I got here. I spent a decent amount of time talking about kind of the path, and it was ultimately my girlfriend, my partner, is quite a bit younger than me, and she was studying business sustainability and was in her master's program at Virginia Tech, and had never lived outside of Michigan before. I grew up there. I moved to Arizona for 7 years, moved back home, but not too close to home, right? So I had that experience, and very much felt I appreciated what I considered home so much more because I had left and come back. And I would tell anyone that has that guttural instinct to want to fly the nest, do it. And that's exactly what I told her, let's do it, and you can always come back. You can always come back. It's never going to be exactly the same when you come back, but you can always come back. And it ultimately became, wherever you get a job, we'll move. Yeah. So Portland was never particularly we've got to move there. It was more playing a little where are we going to move roulette. Almost ended up in a couple of places, almost ended up in Philadelphia, almost ended up in Texas A&M. Wow. And then a really good opportunity for a really cool company in Portland here called Energy 350 that helps big industrial processes. I want to say industrial setups. What would you call I don't know, the word's escaping me, but big industrial setups to help them use energy more efficiently. So they have a team of engineers, and she will go in. It's funny, they call it a treasure hunt. So they go into these big, industrial manufacturing facilities. That's the term I was looking for.
There you go. Yep.
And they will determine areas that may be able to use the energy more efficiently, and then they'll have their engineers run certain programs, and it ultimately kind of saves everyone.
Yeah, like an energy impact reduction type program. Yeah.
So my experience coming to Portland was actually taking a back seat to my partner's career, and part of that was walking away from teaching, walking away from the school. And I came here, and luckily I have a couple of really good clients that are fully remote and made it easier for me to make the move. And part of that, because I had been freelancing after I worked in agencies, I had been freelancing and teaching for about 15 years. And I was busy enough to be happy and not really consider that I need to be thinking about the future. I had a couple of good clients that lasted, years on end, and things were just smooth. I started getting a couple of ex-students that work under me. And then, when this move happened, it was okay, it's time to concentrate on building a business. and not just being a freelancer and a teacher. And part of that, I'll back up a moment before I get to that, is that when you talk about helping people and having some kind of impact, that's something that really spawned in me, I'd say, probably about the middle of my teaching career, where at some point, everyone just wanted to make their ninjas and dragons, right? At some point, we started to decide, we need to start thinking in terms of like social impact and how can we use media to bring awareness about things or to generally help people. So I've had this kind of, progression in that direction. Yeah. And coming out here to Portland, it takes, it's beautiful here, by the way. I love it. The longer that I'm here, the more I like it and the more, I enjoy, so many aspects, which.
So did you read the Encyclopedia Britannica on Portland, Oregon before you moved out here? And does Portland meet or exceed those expectations?
Good question. Right. I had visited Portland for 3 days once in 2010, I think. I took a hot air balloon ride and did a bunch of really cool things.
Now, I'm officially jealous. That's on my bucket list.
I won a coloring contest in 3rd grade, and I was supposed to go up on a hot air balloon ride for winning it in the whole city. Wow. And that day, it rained. And there was no backup plan. So ever since I was a little kid, I was always dying to do it, and it was really cool to do here and see, Mount Hood at 5 a.m. in the morning as you're cruising around. It was super cool.
So cool.
But just before I answer your question, to finish the train of thought of how we met and how I got here. Yeah. It took a few months to settle in, renting a house in a very nice part of Portland called Sellwood, and eventually I was like, okay, I need to get out of my kitchen and start meeting some people, right? And I started, I've never done this before. I've always been, learning how to build everything, but never how to do the sales and business management. And that's certainly a whole other set of skills. This is all very new to me. And I just knew I had to start networking and start meeting people. Yeah. And the first thing I did is start going to some free meetups. And that was cool. I met a few people, but I started to feel like, I think I should try and up my game a little bit. So then I started buying into a couple network groups. The very first one I bought in was OEN, the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network. Yes. And then I joined the Portland Chamber of Commerce. I joined the Better Business Bureau and just started filling my calendar with these types of events. And at the same time, I thought it was a good idea to get into a shared workspace, which there are several around Portland. True. I had checked out a couple of them, and there was this one particular OEN event that was at NedSpace here on the 11th floor, and I remember when I came in, instantly it was like, this is cool. This is another level. This is just being right in the middle of downtown, this huge conference room, all the views. It just has a very professional feel, but it was also filled with people like you and Faris that, have a very exciting, entrepreneurial vibe. And I just, that day I remember talking with you and, pretty quickly after we kind of had our first initial conversations, we talked about the possibility of kind of leading this web UI, UX and interactive room with all, based on everything you had been talking about wanting to, bring positivity and upliftment to the media that is coming out of Portland. Yeah. When I first met you, there's so many intersections of life and experiences that you've had that I've got family in Arizona. My mom lives up in the White Mountains area, and I've got uncles in Phoenix, and so you've been there. I've my grandparents lived in Michigan for a while, and so there's a lot of history of technology and stuff, and I don't know, did you have the first iPhone? I had the second version, the 3G. I started with Android. Oh. In fact, I don't think I've ever even had an iPhone. I worked on PCs for the first 10, 12 years in my career. And then I got my first Mac, was at the agency I worked with. It was a huge Mac tower, Mac Pro tower.
Yeah.
I loved it. The first couple of weeks was hard just to transition the general interface.
Yeah.
But I feel like I would change computers every 2.5 years. But then my first Mac lasted me 8 years.
Yeah.
And then when that company went under and I was freelance, I decided I should get a laptop. And I got a Mac Pro.
Yeah.
Lasted me another 8 years.
Yeah.
Year and a half ago, I just bought another Mac Pro. They're not cheap, but there's certain things that you get what you pay for.
So you've got another 7 years.
At least.
There you go. But yeah, there's so many overlapping things, and then being able to, whenever you're here, we're interacting, we're saying hello and smiling, and like I can run ideas by you and vice versa. And it's just been really good to have you here and to be able to work together on projects and like you said, like to be impactful in the community I live in.
Yeah, and I love that that's kind of the root drive behind what is being built here at NetSpace. And I also feel like, I think I've told you this before, that I didn't really know exactly what I was looking for as I was out there. I'm looking for clients, whatever.
Yeah.
But, something like this, which feels like, a second home, a place where I can meet people that I get along with, but can also do business and grow. And get connected to people that have been around the city longer than I have. I didn't even know half of whether the things were fact or fiction.
Yeah, right. Well, and so in a good example, like tonight, there's 50 people that have RSVP'd for a creative roundtable mixer, and you've got the creative community coming up here to the 11th floor, and we get to also interact with all of those people and then hopefully help them do their thing, which then will help Portland because they're also in Portland. And it's just this happy sphere of things that happen here. And I feel so blessed every day when I hop on the Max and then walk the 2 blocks to NetSpace to the 11th floor. And, and you're here, and I don't want it to end. It's just this like amazing little ride that I've been on for the last almost 6 months, and I will fight tooth and nail to keep this thing going and figure out how to get Portland to notice that we care.
I really believe that we're
crazy.
Just a seed that has sprouted. And that we're really going to take root and grow into a really cool organization. To back it up a moment, when you had mentioned all of the parallels that you initially found in kind of my story in your own life, I think 2 things come to mind. Because I've had kind of unique luck throughout my life. It has not been good and it has not been bad. It has certainly been strange. And coincidences. And some people say coincidence, others say, providence. And ultimately, however those things, however those signs presents themselves, I do truly believe that, this idea of helping the community, helping others around you, I think that there's a lot of truth to you get whatever you give. And it's a cool place to, to put that into action.
I like the idea of, it used to be a thing. I don't know if people still do it. You go through the Starbucks drive-through and there's this little thing called Pay It Forward, where you pay for the other guy's coffee or whatever, and then that person pays for the other. Like, it's this chain of, this is like, I wish we had a Starbucks barista up here on the 11th floor, but this is really like the Pay It Forward on a grand scale. That's kind of how I look at it. It's like I may not get paid for every hour that I'm here because I do have my own business, but I'm on a daily basis. I believe that I'm doing the right thing, and that will pay off in the long run. So, not to get too preachy or get up on the old soapbox, but Before I say goodbye, before we put the bow on this, because we've talked about technology, because we talked about the youth of tomorrow, I did write down this one question, and I think this is maybe a good place to kind of wrap it all up. How do you feel tech will help or hinder the youth of tomorrow? And I know that's a crazy, crazy question, because you and I grew up where it all started, I think. Like, I was the first one of my friends who had a pager.
Right.
And I was the one who had the MP3 player that was on a lanyard around my neck. Like, I was the gadget guy. And technology impacts how you perceive things or how you interact with the world. And we're really getting into, the VR, the AR, like all of that stuff, along with, do we get an implant in our wrist to open the doors to my office building?
Right.
So it's an interesting question to ask someone who has been so deep or so ingrained in the travel or in the on the train of technology for so long. Like, what do you think? I mean, we've got a point now where we're taking cell phones away because we're learning that it's really affecting the youth in a way that maybe we didn't think it would. And it's affecting adults too, but I think for development and all of that, it's like a blessing and a curse, right?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like I certainly believe that we are in a crossroads when it comes to the type of technology that we're talking about that's been growing over the last couple of decades. Technology in general, I believe, has historically been a double-edged sword. So the entire Industrial Revolution just, in one way, made the general, living so much better for so much of the world, but there's also a lot of pollution and things like that that have come, there's always a double-edged sword there. And with, the kind of tech that we consider to be technology today, because everything else has kind of just always been that way as far as we're concerned. I do truly think that it will help and hinder. I think it's ultimately that double-edged sword, and we're already starting to see the ways in which it can hinder. And I think what's important moving forward is to be open and recognize that, and to be able to kind of swim free from the currents of advertising, and really be able to think about what are we really doing here and why. But at the same time, there's just access to knowledge that is just unheralded in the history of our species as far as we know. And I do think that as we go on, I think just like that article about the schools, I think that there will begin to be some pushback of people, realizing the importance of going back to nature, from everything from just a biological health to a spiritual health impact. And I think what really helps is to think in terms of technology as being a tool, or tools that are to be used as tools, and not necessarily something that's a necessity to be constantly inundated with advertising and entertainment in every waking moment. And if we can find ways to put the technology down and to concentrate on other aspects that will help us round out as more whole humans, I do think that the next generation are going to have a choice. They're going to have choices to either, go full Borg from the Star Trek universe, or find that balance that you spoke about earlier to make the most out of these tools without allowing them to be a hindrance.
Do you think we're in a moment of realignment of boundaries when it comes to technology? I think like we swung so far, like everybody got so excited about what we can do. And now we're in this moment of like self-evaluation of like, let's just back the truck up a little bit. And I think we're at that, like this pendulum, like leveling out moment where we're finding this natural balance of it all. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I would like to think so.
Yeah.
However, the wild card in the room is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we could spend another 2
Which
hours.
is a great subject to just end on, but I do think that when you talk about that pendulum swinging, that's going to be a major factor in how, that's really developed and, used by the populace as things move from this, all these ideas into actual, usable, wearable tech.
Yeah, I jumped on the bandwagon of the iPad, and I still have, it's in a case that looks mint. If you know anybody who wants a first generation Apple Watch, I've got one sitting at home. But that's there's even Chat GTP. Did I get that right?
GPT, close enough.
Wow. It's crazy. Like every new update to that, it's like how it's learning so quickly from all of us, and it's going out and grabbing and learning from what we've been doing over the years. Yeah, like you said, that's a whole nother
whole other can of worms.
We could that's opening Pandora's box when it comes to technology. But my hope is that from this podcast episode and just moving forward, that two things happen. If you're listening to this podcast and you want some more information on mental health and how technology affects the youth of today, in the show notes, I will put a couple links in there on some stuff that I found. And I would encourage you, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get that book. I'm going to read it. It talks about, the mental health of kids and how technology is definitely affecting that. And my hope is that we find a spot where, as much as I love eating cheese pizza, I can't do it every single day of my life.
It's a great analogy.
Because I'll develop an allergy to the cheese. I have a cousin who that happened to.
That's tragic.
So, put down the slice, man, and, eat something else. So when it comes to technology, my encouragement to everybody listening is do some research. Don't take everybody else's word for it. The information is out there, and let's draw some boundaries that are healthy for the kids of tomorrow, I guess is kind of where I'm at.
Well said.
Thank you again so much. I appreciate you being here. We'll see what happens on the next episode. One thing I do know is that you're sitting at number 2 out of 3 for fact or fiction. And life is awesome here in Portland because the rain is coming, the cold is coming, and the fires are going away. Oktoberfest happened, and now I'm getting ready to go into the corn maze, which pops up all over the United States. But we have an awesome corn maze in Portland, Oregon, too. Portland, have an awesome day. Have an awesome week. And thank you for listening to This is PDX.